So let me get at it. I will share my screen, and I have a few little things to show you before we begin the discussion. Of course, the first one is a question that a lot of people ask is, why does humanism have such a dumb name? It is a good question, actually, and it is a complicated, history-bound question, as a matter of fact. Don't humanists care about anything else? Nowadays, I mean, the biggest thing is, do you care only about humans and not about the planet that's burning up? You don't care about animals? Well, that's not where humanism was coming from, although it does indeed sort of mess with the venerable title a little bit, because it does get more complicated as time goes on. So here's the Oxford Dictionary, British: a rationalist outlook or system of thought attaching prime importance to human rather than divine or supernatural matters. I can agree with that one. I think that works pretty well. A Renaissance cultural movement which turned away from medieval scholasticism and revived interest in ancient Greek and Roman thought. That's true. And among some contemporary writers, a system of thought criticized as being centered on the notion of the rational autonomous self and ignoring the conditioned nature of the individual. Now, that's a little more postmodern in the way that it's going, but one of the big complaints or attacks on humanism is that it's still based in a rationalist Renaissance model or Enlightenment model that is stuck way back there and is looking at the individual human rights rather than how do we work as a communal whole. And that is a little bit more true, although if you actually know the history of liberalism, it does become a little less damning if you begin to look at the deeper meanings that are going on here. But Renaissance humanism, yeah, it's hard to tell when it really started. It started in Italy and the Italian states. There was no Italy, and worked its way north sometime in the 1400s in Italy, and then it slowly moved its way into Northern Europe. So number one, it's a break from religious orthodoxy, and this is true very much so. Although we have to assume and say very quickly that it's about education. And there were very few educated people in Europe in those days. So it's going to be actually a very small group of people who are going to be moving away from religious orthodoxy. Emphasis on personal expression. This is true. And again, one of the things about it is that authors begin to put their names on the writings that they do. This is my book, kind of thing. Assumptions concerning free inquiry and criticism. That is, that you can do that without getting hanged or hanged, drawn, and quartered, or burned at the stake. And yes and no is the answer, actually, to how many people got away with that. A vision of the possibilities of human thought, meaning that maybe people can figure out some ways out of human problems. And that's what sometimes I define humanism that way. It's human beings thinking that human beings can solve human problems. So, and seeing human affairs as humanly manageable, same kind of thing, but saying basically, okay, well, the Pope actually is just a guy, kind of thing. Too, and that sort of thing. Leonardo da Vinci, the Vitruvian Man, being probably the biggest symbol of Renaissance thinking. Thomas More's Utopia, again, talking about religious freedom, even for atheists, interestingly enough, in this utopia where if you're honest and good, upstanding, what you believe in your own head doesn't much matter to us. And that's a very radical thought. And of course, Shakespeare, what a piece of work is a man, how noble in reason, how infinite in faculties, in form and moving, how express and admirable, in action, how like an angel, in apprehension, how like the, whoops, I can't say it for the little thing, but like a god, the beauty of the world, a paragon of animals, and yet to me, what is this quintessence of dust? Man delights me not. And of course, as you also know, the next line is, nor woman, not neither. It's not about humanity. I don't like anybody, even though they're all, even though all of these things are kind of cool about that, right? So that's kind of it. And then the way humanism goes into the American way of thinking, the Enlightenment ideas, the equal rights of man and the happiness of every individual are the only legitimate objects of government. Interesting way of looking at this in the way that it works. And to get you deeper than almost anybody in the world knows about humanism, let's go to The Reasoner, a weekly journal edited by G.J. Holyoake, who coined the term secularism. He was a Brit, 1817 to 1906. And the free thought means fearless thought, he said. It is not deterred by legal penalties nor by spiritual consequences. Dissent from the Bible does not alarm the true investigator who takes truth for authority and not authority for truth. And you can see how that goes right back to the Renaissance and the way that we were talking about that. And this is the magazine that John Dietrich was reading, the guy who forms Religious Humanism here in the United States at First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis. He was reading this and similar journals from Great Britain. And this is where he picked up the term humanism. It's interesting that he didn't use the term secularism instead. And maybe, it's hard to know whether that would have been better. But this is Holyoake definitely saw it as a secular, what we would call secular humanism. He was not after any kind of establishment of Congregationalism or anything like that. And basically, he was seeing it just like the American Humanist Association or the British humanists see it today. We'll send you a magazine. You can watch a video once in a while, but basically that's the touch points, and it really doesn't go much beyond that. So, and that's really where they're coming from. And I looked it up on Wikipedia. Humanism is a philosophical stance that emphasizes the individual and social potential and agency of human beings. It considers human beings as the starting point for serious moral and philosophical inquiry. I think Dietrich would have agreed with that one, as a matter of fact. And I'll get back to Dietrich in a few moments, but let's think about this a little bit. So, has anybody ever thought that, okay, I've got Joyce Reedus on the line there. There we go. Yay. All right. Has anyone besides me ever thought that humanism is a really bad term for this idea? Yeah. Yes, yeah. Phil?
Yes. No, because to me, it seems to suggest that we worship humans, or that we put humans at the absolute apex of either evolution, the ultimate outcome of it, or the head of the just the top of the peak. And I don't think that's what we think, and I'm not sure that we ever did. But the definition that you had up there about the primacy of human over supernatural or something, if someone had paid me to rewrite that, I might just say that the primacy of natural over supernatural. We are a part of nature. We're not the only part of nature. So I've never loved the term humanism. I prefer to call myself a Unitarian and then just kind of fobble along after that. Hi, Joyce.
I guess I've never thought of it as an issue because I've kind of thought of it as we as humans are responsible rather than some magic deity.
Mhm. Right. Yeah. I mean, that's definitely, I think what Dietrich was thinking when he came up with the name. Although he did have a probably too optimistic a view of what science would eventually do. And we do have to admit that it was part of the optimism of his time to think that science would get a little further than science actually did. But you can understand that when you look at, you got Einstein and Heisenberg, and you got a few pretty smart folk out there doing some pretty amazing stuff at the time. So
Part of it too is humans as opposed to what? What are we different from? Whether you're Unitarian or humanist, well, fine, but what are we kind of counterposing ourselves to? And I think in Dietrich's day, humanism made a lot of sense, not, supernatural, blah, blah, blah. Are we naturalists? Oh, are we nudists? What does that mean?
yes. Well, yes, David knows a theologian from Boston University, Wesley Wildman, who's in a group that I am privileged to belong to. And Wesley, we were at a conference together in Salt Lake City over the summer, and he said, well, call yourself naturalist, just call yourself naturalist. And I said, Wesley, they'll just think we're nudists. It's just as bad, it's just as bad. It's no, no, Wesley, most Americans don't look it up in the dictionary. So no, naturalism, it means you go to the nude beaches in American consciousness. So that's an additional problem. But we can't say that Wesley is entirely practical. He's a little too smart for most of us, I'm afraid. So he doesn't, I don't think he lives in the real world in his own mind, but a lot of the time. But he's a brilliant theologian. So yeah. Any other reflections on this idea? I do want to go to, let me see if we can get you thinking here. I'll go over to John H. Dietrich here, 1878, 1957. Dietrich is the minister who came to First Unitarian Society in 1916, and he did say, I'm a humanist, and the people at FUS said, well, what's that? And he said, well, this is a new idea, and they hired him, and that's why I say that FUS is the birthplace of Congregational Humanism, really religious humanism, as he was calling it, because they knowingly did this. And they made the choice to do that. His previous congregation, he had been studying humanism, but he was a theist when he went there. And you can read his talks from that time period, and you see that he's using God language and that kind of thing. He slowly backs out of this. He had been almost tried for heresy as a Reformed minister. More traditional Protestants left before he could be condemned, and became a Unitarian, which was much more open to these kinds of ideas. But they were not very open to the idea of humanism as he was exploring it, actually, as it turns out. So in one of the speeches, Phil likes Dietrich's old stuff. I can't remember how I dug this one up, but this is one of his first sermons at FUS, and he's telling the people there what he intends to do. And he said, these four things then constitute the program which I have in mind for this society during my ministry. First, to make it a common meeting ground for all men and women, rich and poor, learned and unlearned, theist and atheist, on the single common basis of religious fellowship. And notice he's right up front about that. And I always tell people who think of Dietrich as this flaming atheist guy, Dietrich never said he was an atheist. He never said he was an atheist. He didn't want to talk about it in the same way that the Buddha said, we'll talk about the gods as soon as we solve all the human problems. So, it's a fine thing to do, but it's your leisure time activity. It's not what we need to be doing now. And I really think, I don't know if Dietrich knew that quote, but it's the same kind of idea. But you see right up front, he's going to say this, that he doesn't want to be those rich Unitarians. It was rich East Coast Unitarian types. He doesn't want to be just the smart, people with advanced degrees. He doesn't just want to be an atheist church. So quite upfront about that. Second, to make it a fountain of inspiration for all scientific social betterment. And this again is a little bit dated, as you see, in terms of the history of it, that he's really a person of his time thinking that science can fix social problems. And the biggest place where that really doesn't sound good is in the idea of eugenics. That was part of the water of the day, and not a good idea as it turned out. But in the 1920s, it didn't have the dripping horror of Nazism quite yet. So third, to shift the emphasis of thought from the traditional to the scientific, from the theological to the historical, from the irrational to the rational, from the supernatural to the natural. And again, it's a little bit, a little further than, a little more overstated than we probably would do that nowadays. But unless you really are a totally secular atheist humanist. But you can see where he's going with that. And fourth, to hold before the eyes of people, the moral ideal, and to place behind human endeavor moral motives. This idea being, how can you be good without God, basically, right? So, or at least that's the way I read it. So the little summary here, we can come back to that in a moment, but you see where he was going with that, kind of the openness that he was hoping for there.
Well, it was during his time that FUS met in theaters because we had such large crowds that we needed that space, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. This was a brand new concept. It's not a new it's sort of, when Sunday assemblies came along a few years ago, I wanted to hit someone upside the head and say, no, you're not the first people who thought of that. And that's part of why I went to Salt Lake City to read a paper about the history of FUS, because even scholars don't know that FUS has been doing this for well over 100 years. I think
why is it so secret? We must not be doing a good job of getting the word out.
Well, it's interesting, but Minneapolis is a unicorn, I guess we'd have to say. It just is, and FUS is part of the Minneapolis unicorn thing. My wife went to jury duty today, and she was in a random pool of, I forget, 18, 20 people. And every person in the room had a master's degree. And if you know about American juries, that's one of the things people complain about, isn't it, Phil? That we don't tend to have high quality jurors a lot of the time.
I don't do jury trials.
Okay, all right, no comment. In the county where I'm from, the joke is that it's only the old and unemployed who do jury duty. So.
Mhm.
So we are a unicorn in that way, I think. So that's part of it.
You know, the stuff that you had on the screen from Dietrich, I mean, a lot of it does speak to me, but there particularly the point about was it the scientific betterment or something
Mhm.
of that sort, it speaks to me. And yet I feel like, you know, what distinguishes us from, say, at least my impression of the Minnesota humanists, for example, is that I think if we were to do this thing about, you know, scientific betterment or you know, we risk sort of drifting into a lecture society, and that's fine, but that's not necessarily a spiritual community. And so, you know, again, if I were writing things, I would say, you know, scientific advances or whatever, because scientific advances inform our spirituality. Because the more we understand about the universe, the more we understand about ourselves. And that is a spiritual quest or some such thing. But to just say, well, we want scientific betterment, why? You know, what's the point? And why do we need a congregation for that? Because I could just go to the, you know, Bell Museum and listen to lectures for that matter. And they won't be passing the plate. Well, they'll send me the stuff about, you know, donation envelopes and stuff like that. But, you know.
They'll charge you less. How about that?
I probably have to pay for parking. That's where I draw the line.
There you go. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I would add that modern social science, behavioral science also inform this dilemmas of rationality. So what 100 years ago seemed obvious, well, we could be rational and scientific. Well, no, we aren't. But knowing that also informs what we do as a community and understanding when we are rational, when we are not, and why. And I think that's also part of what we are.
Right, right. Well, yes, I think, you know, I mean, also, again, we have to historicize this, right? We have to put it in its context. And social science was striving to be a science at that time, right? Anthropology was striving to be a science at that time, psychology. So there were these other sciences that were attempting to get into at a scientific level. We can argue about how close they came eventually, but I think Dietrich would have said that yes, anthropology is a science, and anthropology does teach us something about human behavior. I mean, I love it. I love reading anthropology. I'm in no way, shape, or form an anthropologist, but some of the discoveries do inform, I think, human moral, ethical behavior in ways that are important, you know. So, yeah.
I imagine that Dietrich must have struggled on some level to explain to his contemporaries how you could envision atheists being among the people who would come together for religious fellowship or religious community, or however that was phrased in that slide. I mean, I think we understand that, but
Yeah.
we're a century down the road, and I just would be curious to know how that landed. Did people?
Mhm.
I would just guess that at that time, maybe that I'm wrong, that they would have not been able to fathom why an atheist would want religious community, or that even such a thing would be possible.
Right, right. Well, yes, and yeah, as Terrell said, I think that's one of the things that brought people to the theater to see Dietrich was, you know, just what the heck is he doing? You know, what does he mean by that? You know, well, and further, you know, the unicorn nature of Minneapolis. You know, we're talking about Scandinavian settlers at that time, right? And who had all come out of state churches. So I think one thing that, you know, when they got over here, a lot of professionals who grew up in, you know, the Lutheran or or Sweden or whatever, you know, said, you know, why did I do that? Why bother? Right. probably, I kind of think that's probably part of it, because the other place that humanism was developing at the same time was in Des Moines, Iowa, with Curtis Reese's Unitarian congregation there. And they too were Scandinavians who settled there. So I think it's a state church thing, maybe. But I mean, I've never read that. But it seems reasonable to me that that may be the answer. Part of the answer is they had a religious understanding of what it meant, but the content made no sense to them anymore. It was just dry, monarchical, state stuff, basically.
How did the Scandinavians in Europe, how did they, from a timing perspective, in terms of their acceptance of Christianity and all that stuff? I mean, obviously the Italians and the Mediterraneans would have been pretty early on, but my sense is that the Scandinavians were much later. And I guess I'm just curious if there was something in the culture that kind of held on to more of those Norse or Nordic, roots, the pre-Christian stuff that just kind of made them maybe more inclined to be skeptical or ask questions.
Mhm.
Well, the church basically worked its way north in Scandinavia.
Yeah.
And when you get up toward, say, Estonia, they still on the churches have a lot of the old pagan symbols, because they weren't really ready to give those up yet. And the church, as it was working its way north, let them do it.
Yeah.
So and it's, if you get farther south, you really don't see those pagan symbols to the extent that you do when you get north to Estonia, where they become almost dominant.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and remembering that Christianity was a militaristic takeover, basically, right, as it moved north. The story is that, the story of Christianity, I'm a Christian now, I see the light. No, that people were forced into it. Yeah.
And
Yeah, Joyce. Yeah. Go ahead, Tara. Go ahead.
To say, and it adopted in its celebrations a lot of the old pagan celebrations,
Right.
especially as you move north.
Yeah. Joyce.
The Lithuanians were the last to accept the Christian church.
Which ones?
Lithuania.
Lithuania. Okay.
Yeah. And in Greenland and Iceland, they still believe in fairies. They're sincere in their belief in fairies. So, it's true that the further north they got, the less they were willing to give up their pagan beliefs. And so, Europeans needed an earth mother, and that's why we have Mary.
There you go. Yeah, no, it was a military, Islam, we always call Islam a religion of the sword, but Christianity in Europe was a religion of the sword.
I think they both were.
Well, yes, and ask the Native Americans about that, of course, as well. So what happened when you begin to look more deeply into it? What would happen is that, of course, we're talking feudal Europe, so the priests were converting the upper classes, right? And if the upper class, if the local baron and his wife became Christian, then they said, everyone get, baptized or else, right? I mean, there were literally sword fights in I think it was Norway. There were one of the priests there was just was a berserker, basically, who who would challenge anyone to individual combat who disagreed about Christianity. So, and he always won. So there you go. You must have been right. But I mean, the other side of that, though, is when you stop and think about it, which countries are de-Christianizing the fastest? Same ones, right? So it just eked its way up, and then it just kind of started going back down again, and I mean, literally, of course, I'm a church geek, but in Rome, the first Christian church that was built to be a Christian church is still there, right? It's not that old. I mean, it's a couple thousand years old, but I mean, it's not that, it's not that old when you look at other buildings in Rome, right? We just happened to find, the last time we were there, my wife and I, we rented a bed and breakfast thing, and the path that we walked every day to get into the city went by a church that was built on the top of a grotto that was pagan, and now it's acceptable. They opened it back up, and I mean the religious artifacts from pagan Rome were still there. Whoever plastered up the wall left it, right? And so it was kind of, it was not as sure as the Christians would have liked to have told the story, very frankly, right? So, right. So, and it never had as much of a whole. I mean, heathen just means you live on the heath, right? It means you're a farmer, and so those damn farmers out there, they're the problems, out there. They're not Christian, so they're heathens. So yeah, I mean, my family from my father's side are Welsh. The Welsh did not decide to be Christian. They were forced to be Christian, right? By their conquering British overlords. They were Christianized or else, right? So, and my father's family were not at all Christian when they came to the U.S. That's a later. That's the redneck American thing. That's not a British thing. George Orwell, who of course was an atheist socialist basically, but sometimes, and then sometimes he wasn't. But anyway, he argued that the working class in England had no interest in religion whatsoever because they saw it as the games that the monarchy plays. So why bother? That king guy, it's good for him. It's not good for me. So that was Orwell's argument in To Wig and Peer. He talks about the working class. It's a very good book still, I think. But yeah. So for example, we have some folks in the congregation that are named ASP with the last name ASP, ASAP, ASP. And my understanding is that was a designation of people who had remained pagan, and the punishment at some point for being pagan is that you had a poisonous asp shoved it down your throat, and your mouth was sewed up, and that was your death sentence. And then they were called asps, and so I assume that some of our FUS folk come by their heathenism quite honestly, because great grandma did not end up well, right? So,
well, that would be something. Maybe we should be humanists. We could be heathens. Could we do that? I mean, that sounds like fun.
All right.
I mean,
Well, didn't Jim have a sign, something like that, along the
yeah. Your friendly neighborhood heathens, I think it was, since 1951 or something.
Yep, absolutely. Well, or infidels. I mean, non-creedal Christians were called infidels in the 19th century. So
there you go.
Well, and that's the last slide I will show you is the good question of what is a better term for it. Freethinker has been used, infidel has been used, secularist is still used. I wish we were called everythingists, but I don't think anyone's going to buy that one. I'm an ist.
Yeah.
No, I think I wish that Freethinker had won out, frankly, but I think that it was probably tarnished by being of German origin.
Oh, interesting. I mean,
Probably.
there's something
Dated
there's
too,
something
isn't
to
it?
be said. Oh, go ahead, Joyce.
Isn't that term a bit dated as well?
Is what
Isn't
dated?
that term a bit dated
Yeah.
as
Well, I mean,
well?
yeah. I mean, it definitely is. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
But
Yeah.
that also focuses again on the thinking part, and we're more than just, thinkers. We're a community,
Well,
so the community aspect has to be baked in.
well, free feeler might really not be a good idea.
Well, if
Virginia,
if we were naturalists, free-feeling naturalists, I think our numbers would skyrocket. Perhaps I'm not sure.
You may be right, Bill.
Virginia, I think you were going to say something.
I've always kind of liked the term humanist. I know I'm going against the tide here, but it immediately tells people that my focus isn't on, what's going on up in the clouds and the guy with the white beard on, sitting out there. That's not where my focus is. And so they may not understand it, but they sure like it better than when I tell them I'm an atheist. That just, then you can't be trusted. And so at least as a humanist, then it makes it seem like they could identify with you on some level. They don't like free thinker. They don't want anybody to be free thinking, So yeah, I've never minded the term.
Well, good. What Dietrich would hug your neck, as we say in the South, for that. Yeah, I mean, it does. Well, I mean, definitely, atheist as a term says what you're not.
Right.
And that's why I don't use the term. Even though, I mean, at base, I'm an agnostic, because I don't think that human beings are capable of knowing a lot of things, or probably, I don't know, but it does. It seems like we don't see a lot of, we don't know a lot that we think we know, maybe, but it's according to who I'm with. If I'm with a bunch of Christian ministers, I call myself an agnostic, and I think they understand that. When I'm with a bunch of UU ministers, I say I'm an atheist because they tick me off being all wishy-washy about it. So it's kind of according to the what audience really,
We can also debate the value of Unitarian. There's one divine essence, not three. That's not our shtick.
Right.
Yeah.
But at the same time, though, I mean, I was going to say that I like the term Unitarian much better, not because of that theological thing that you were just talking about, Paul, because I agree with you, who cares? But rather, it's the sense of unity among all things and all people. And that's more in my head what Unitarianism could mean, and universalism in a similar sense. It gives you, I think people know I love this whole idea of the cosmos and crap, and that there's an element of that in that word.
Too many syllables.
But those, I think they're taken and they're already defined. So
Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, yeah. I mean, Unitarian Universalist also is a very big term for something, And I was mentioning some of us met at 12:15 on Sunday, and we were talking about Universalists because John Cummins, who some of you know, who was the minister at First Universalist for many years, really built the congregation. His father was the secretary of the National Universalist Organization, and in the 1920s and 30s, they really thought they were going to go out of business. Basically, they were falling apart everywhere, and so he's the one who began to say, let's broaden this. It's not just about heaven and hell and who goes and who doesn't. It's not even about Christianity anymore. And some of you know that at that time period, I'm such a great illustrator, but they did an off-center cross. It was a circle with an off-center cross because to say that they were Christian in origin, but but they had moved that from the center, right? It was the idea. I have a Universalist pen somewhere or other. That was the idea that they were, yes, we started out as Protestant Christians, but we now have gone beyond that, and we're open to the rest of the world's understandings. And that's how he saved, that's how he saved it. But John Cummins himself was very basically a humanist, not a universalist in the way that actually I think universalism is now going backwards in time. I fear, but that's probably because I'm basically a humanist, and so I don't like seeing people going back to the roots. There you go. No hell for 150 years. There you go. Yes, it carries its own baggage there. Yeah.
I had always hoped that the Unitarian Universalist name would get changed to Seekers. So that then you don't have all that messy, like where it came from, and it just immediately tells people that, you're out there.
Mhm. I've had that same word come to mind as well, Virginia, the seekers. Because to me, I think, my understanding of Unitarianism is that, it's not about, here's what you should believe, but that we are creating a community in which we are all on our journeys, however, trite that phrase might be. And this is my cat. And that we are seeking something, and that we have things to learn from one another. We have things we can teach one another. And Hoover thinks it's not all about humans either.
Yay, great kitty cat. Yes. Well, yes, much is in a name. And as David knows, we got off on Sunday, we got off on dissing Puritans in general, and therefore the origin of Unitarians for sure as being not as pretty as one would wish it to be. But all terms, of course, carry historical baggage. As a historicist at heart, I mean, there's nothing you can really say. I mean, the Seekers is an Australian band from the 1960s. They did some good music. No, Seeker is not bad. Seeker is not bad. Yeah.
Well, it means something to evangelicals too, in my recollection. If you're a seeker, you're you believe in God, but you're just not going to church, and so you're what the mega churches are trying to bring in, seeker sensitive services. Yeah.
So we could be going to church but not believing in God. It's just the flip around. So it's all good.
Yeah. Well, and it is true that why assume that people coming to a place like First Unitarian Society have made up their minds, right? I mean, for my personal journey, I mean, I was born Pentecostal, and I stopped believing in the Pentecostal God, and I didn't know any other ones, because where I was from in the deep Southern Illinois, there are basically no liberal religious traditions there. You can be this kind of fundamentalist or that kind of fundamentalist, but there's not much choice. Nowadays, there is a UU congregation in the college town there, but in my day, there was nothing, and there weren't any bookstores either. I mean, so basically, I only knew one kind of God, so I was pretty clearly an atheist because I didn't believe in that kind of God. Well, I later learned there was a whole lot of other varieties out there of, Wesley Wildman's God Wesley is actually an atheist too, I would argue, but he's so complex in his atheism that he has a God, that he uses God language, right? I mean, and he's a practicing Christian. And that doesn't bother him, because, he's gone through all these convolutions of understandings of deity, and, that most people are not even, well, they don't have time to do it, for one thing, right? Yeah. You really have to become a professional theologian if you want to think about it that much. But, I mean, I think a lot more people are like me in that they think that the one flavor of Christianity they were raised in is the only one. And so where do you go after that, right? So.
Mhm.
And clearly, I mean, from Dietrich's statement, I mean, he wants to be that umbrella, right? That's what he's telling people in 1916 about FUS is, we're going to have rich and poor, educated, uneducated, atheist, theists. We're going to cover the waterfront, and we're going to be about fixing human problems, right?
Mhm.
There's a book coming out of an acquaintance sent me part of the manuscript. It's a friend of his who argues that liberalism, as Paul loaned me a book on liberalism I've been reading, and there's some great ones. But see, I took off the dust cover, the dust jacket, so I wouldn't scratch it up, Paul. But liberalism, that liberalism itself should be the secular religion. And he makes some very good points about that, because what is liberalism? That's one of the reasons I've been talking about that. And if everybody were liberal, we would kind of have a nicer society, a kinder, gentler, I don't care what you think about monetary policy, you're still going to be nicer if you buy into the morality, right, of these basic liberal principles of live and let live, respect for everybody. It's kind of beautiful if you stop to think about it. So
It certainly can be, I'll say that much.
know.
And I also feel compelled to say I do think that there are some left-wing ideologues who are not very pleasant people,
Well,
and that gets ugly as well. So it could be taken too far, but yeah, it's certainly your point is well made.
that's one of the reasons, Phil, that I talk about that, and one of the things I'm going to be talking surreptitiously about, sort of in a submerged way, about the tradition of UU ministry in general, that it actually goes back to the Puritan way of doing things, and that's not a good way of doing things. We need to be more liberal in our formation of UU ministers, so that they don't have this idea that they should in some way be the Trumpian of the congregation, the decider in all things. And we still kind of teach that in seminary, unfortunately, that I must know better. Well, why? I mean, the Pope knows better because God talks to him. I mean, if you're in that system, but in the UU system, I mean, why would a UU minister be smarter than you? Just because, right? So.
There is a danger of illiberalism from the left as well as the right.
Yeah.
You see that in some congregations where the minister, he or she is a know-all, decides all, and that's not us either, and shouldn't be.
No, I guess I have a vision of what a minister would be is somebody who facilitates. You can speak ex cathedra all you really want to, David, and I'm still going to be like maybe, but yeah, nice. But how do the ministers facilitate our the growth in the congregational members' spirituality? How does that, if we're all on a journey, how does the minister present us with new viewpoints and new things to consider, and that we can sort of chew on, and how does it inform our own individual or collective evolution along the way? And so those are the sermons, or I guess we don't call them sermons, we call them talks. Those are the talks that I think are the ones that are so interesting. Is you give something to think about, something to really kind of work on and work with, and say, where do I go with this? How does this fit in with the whatever I've got going on in there, and kind of go from there.
Yeah.
But it's, I'm going to channel Audrey Kingstrom here for just a second. And that is, if we didn't have those pews, man, can you just imagine? And I love the pews. I would be such a high church humanist, with the pews and the organ music. I mean, holy cow. Anyway, but if we had it so that, we all had these individual chairs and stuff like that. And, envision a talk on a Sunday morning where the minister, has a brief, spiel. And then we all just kind of turned our chairs, and kind of met in small groups and started talking about that. And what do we think about that? And, it'd be a totally different than just us facing forward and listening. It would be just a totally different dynamic. And I'm not trying to criticize you, David, or because of the way, that's not the point. But I just think it would be such an interesting, different approach.
Yeah. Well, I agree. One of the problems with any congregation is that you are a prisoner of your building.
But I don't think we are. I mean, that building lends itself easily to just go downstairs and do that. You just set up the chairs, and the beauty of it is you have access to food if you want. You can just wander into the kitchen as well, and snack. So there's nothing that says every single Sunday meeting, gathering, assembly, church service has to take place upstairs.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's a silly kind of.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. As a matter of fact, one of the things I've been thinking about, I mean, for younger people, what is our main competition? Well, it's brunch, right? So could we do brunch for the under 40s downstairs? And we can now pipe in the entire, thing. You can pick and choose and watch what you want to watch and not what you don't. Someday I am going to retire. And before I do, one of my ideas is that I am going to fall on a sword, very blunt one, but a sword, and say, for my legacy, FUS people, can we get rid of the pews? I'm seriously considering that. I'm not yet considering retirement because I'm too poor, but when I do, that has occurred to me. Also because of rentals. I mean, think about what we could do with that if the pews weren't there. You could have a supper club that you two could rent with a jazz band, and I mean, it's beautiful at night in there, and there's no reason not to be able to rent it and have some linen tablecloths on some nice tables in there. But we can't because the darn pews are bolted to the floor. Yeah, Joyce. Can't hear you,
Joyce.
Can't hear you, Joyce.
There we
There
go.
we go.
How's that?
There you go. Yay.
Okay, the major proponent for saving the pews, because the pews make it feel like church, is Roger Clemens, and he's no longer attending for health reasons.
Yeah.
But there is that little segment that if we take out the pews, it won't really be like church anymore, which of course is the point.
That's
But
I will say that I will not fight you on taking out the pews.
But again, there's that building is perfect to experiment. And if we wanted to, we could send the high school kids off to the Russian Orthodox church to experience their Sunday service, because no chairs either,
Yeah.
Right? You never
There
did
you
that.
go. Yes, you're right. Yes, it is yes, pews are a Protestant a Protestant thing. Those good old European cathedrals, you had to stand up in those in the good old days.
I belong to a UU church in New England, and we were a small congregation. And what we did is we took our very traditional pews. It still had the pig pens on the side, you know, the old cubicle kind of things. But we took the middle pews and we unbolted them and went. And then when I was leaving, we were talking about putting them on wheels because it got a little cumbersome to move them around. But what a difference that made. It still felt like church, but when we got them more of in a U shape or a circle, it was fabulous. And
There you go.
so you can put those babies on wheels.
There you go. There you go. Absolutely. Yes. And when things can be moved. Well, the church in Evanston, Illinois was built by when a humanist minister who signed the first manifesto was minister, and it was built at almost exactly the same time as FUS. Very modern, you know, the very mid-century modern, and it was built with chairs specifically. And it's a very flexible space because, you know, they got the tile floor, and by golly, you can do anything with those chairs. And actually, they're smaller. The building is smaller, so they have their coffee hour up there, and they just move the chairs around, throw in some tables, and there you go. So it's much more flexible. But we'll see. But you see how you get from from the sublime to the pews very quickly.
We've
Well,
never
thank
had a
you all.
heresy trial at FUS before, David, but it sounds like we're headed for one.
You can always, well, you can build a fire out of the pews, you know. Okay, yeah. Well, yeah, we better go, Terrell. Thank you all for joining in, and we'll do this the first Monday of the month, and enjoy the rest of your evening.